I woke up to the feeling that someone was watching me, but the room was supposed to be empty. The window, wide and bare without curtains, seemed to swallow the darkness outside, and in that darkness, a shape waited. I was driving through the Midwest when I pulled into a roadside motel just past midnight. The highway had stretched on for hours, and the neon sign promising vacancy $39 a night was too tempting to ignore. The place looked run down but not abandoned. I told myself I just needed a few hours of rest before continuing my drive. The check-in was quick, the lobby reeking faintly of cigarettes and mildew. The man behind the desk barely looked up from his phone as he handed me the key to room 8. His only words were, "Check-out's at 10. I was too tired to care about the peeling wallpaper or the buzzing fluorescent light outside my door. But when I stepped into the room, something immediately felt off. The first thing I noticed was that the window, which faced the parking lot, had no curtains, no blinds, no shade, nothing. Just a wide, exposed pane of glass. I figured maybe they were broken or removed, but it made me uncomfortable. The lot outside was dimly lit, a single yellow bulb flickering near the far end. I could see my car from the bed, and anyone out there could see me. Still, exhaustion won. I dropped my bag on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and lay on the stiff mattress. The hum of the air conditioner was almost enough to lull me to sleep. Almost, because after a few minutes, I felt it. That crawling awareness you get when someone is staring at you. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, but the glow from the parking lot lamp bled faintly through the window. And that's when I saw it, what looked like the silhouette of a person standing just beyond the glass. I shot upright, my heart pounding. The shape didn't move. It was too dark to make out details, just a darker mass against the already black night. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of a tree, or even my own imagination. Still, I couldn't look away. I sat there frozen for what felt like minutes until finally I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I lay back down, rolling onto my side so I wouldn't have to face the window. But sleep never came. At some point, I heard it. A faint scuffing sound, like a shoe dragging across gravel. I turned my head slowly, dreading what I might see. And, sure enough, the silhouette was still there. Only now it was closer. It was pressed up against the glass. I couldn't see a face, just the vague shape of a head tilted slightly as if it were peering in. My blood ran cold. I wanted to believe it was just some drunk guest who wandered outside the wrong room, but something about how still it was, how deliberate, made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and shined the flashlight at the window. The beam cut across the glass, and for the briefest moment, I thought I caught the outline of fingers spread against it. Then the light hit glare, and the shape was gone. I bolted upright and rushed to the door, heart hammering, intent on running to the front desk. But when I opened it, the lot was empty. Just my car, the buzzing lamp, and silence. Still, I didn't want to go back into the room. After pacing outside for a few minutes, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing from fatigue. So I went back in, locking the door, double-checking it, then shoving the chair beneath the handle. I tried to sleep with my back to the window, but every noise made me jolt. Around 3 a.m., I must have drifted off, because I woke again to something far worse. Breathing, not mine, not the mechanical hum of the AC. Slow, steady breathing right behind me. I turned, trembling, to face the window. And there it was, pressed against the glass so close I could make out the faint fog of condensation where its mouth touched was. The shape of a face, still featureless, still dark, but undeniably human. The head tilted again, as though curious, as though it knew I was too terrified to move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. My phone was in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to look away long enough to dial. All I could do was stare at that faceless outline peering in at me. Then, as if realizing I was watching, it slowly raised a hand and tapped on the glass. Tap, tap. The sound was soft, but in the dead quiet of the room, it might as well have been thunder. I snapped. I lunged for my bag, grabbed my keys, and bolted. I didn't care about the deposit, my shoes, nothing. I ran out the door, across the lot, and into my car. When I turned the ignition and the headlights flared on, I saw the window of room 8. Empty. No silhouette. No face. Just a blank, curtainless window staring back at me. I drove until sunrise before stopping again. I haven't stayed in a motel since, and even now, whenever I catch my reflection in a dark window, I half expect to see something else standing behind it, waiting. I woke up to the sound of my motel door, unlocking like someone had a key to my room. I froze, listening as the knob slowly turned and the door creaked open. I was on a long drive for work, traveling cross-country with only myself to keep company. After 12 hours behind the wheel, I finally gave in to exhaustion and pulled into a roadside motel. It wasn't anything special, just one of those dimly lit, one-story places with flickering neon letters spelling out vacancy. The man at the front desk looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed the form, handed over my card, and he gave me a brass key on a plastic tag with the number 14 scratched into it. His directions were short. Far end on the left. The room was exactly what I expected. Stale air. Cigarette burns in the carpet. A faint musty odor that clung to the curtains. Still, the lock worked, the water ran, and the bed didn't collapse when I sat on it. That was enough. I set my bag by the door, double-checked that it was locked, and collapsed onto the bed dot at some point during the night. I woke up. The room was silent, except for the steady rattle of the air conditioner. The glowing digits of the alarm clock read 3:04 a.m. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the locked dot. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming, still half asleep, but the sound was followed by the click of the knob turning. Slowly, intentionally. I sat upright in bed, my heart hammering. The door opened just a crack, letting in a thin blade of light from the buzzing motel sign outside. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. The door stopped, hanging half open. No answer. I scrambled for my phone on the nightstand, fumbling in the dark. But before I could grab it, the door creaked open wider. Someone stepped inside. All I could make out was a tall shadow against the faint glow from the window. Whoever it was didn't say a word. They just stood there. I finally found my phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, landing on a man in the doorway. He froze like a deer in headlights. He was gaunt, pale, with greasy hair falling across his face. His eyes looked wide and glassy, like he hadn't slept in days. He wore a stained hoodie and held something in his hand, something metallic that caught the light before he quickly shoved it into his pocket. This is my room," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "No, it's not," I snapped, my voice higher than I wanted it to be. "The desk gave me this room. Get out." He just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to make sense of it. Then, without another word, he turned and pulled the door shut behind him. I sat frozen, still clutching my phone, every muscle in my body tense. I wanted to believe it was some mistake, that the guy had been given the wrong key. But the look in his eyes, the way he lingered, made my skin crawl. I got up, locked the door again, and shoved the desk chair under the knob. I barely slept the rest of the night, jumping at every sound the building made. When the sun came up, I went straight to the front desk. The man from the night before was gone. A woman was working now. I told her someone had come into my room. In the middle of the night, she frowned. That's impossible. Each key is unique, and once it's checked out, no one else has one. I insisted, describing the man I saw. Her face drained of color. You said room 14? She asked quietly. Nodded. Her voice dropped. Sir, no one should have been able to get in there. And the man you described, he sounds like someone who, well, he used to stay here a lot, years ago, before he passed. I stared at her, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. She leaned closer, almost whispering. You're not this first guest in that room to see him. He always comes back around 3 a.m, and he always tries the door. I checked out without another word, got into my car, and didn't stop driving until I was 100 miles away. I still can't explain what I saw. Maybe it was some addict who looked eerily like the man she described. Maybe she was messing with me. But deep down, I know what I heard. The scrape of a key, the slow turn of the knob, and a man standing in the dark, stepping into a room he should never have had access to. Room 14, 3 a.m. I'll never forget the way he looked at me, like I was the one who wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to stay at the front desk, but every time I looked through the peephole, the motel clerk was standing right outside my door, and each time, he was a little closer. I was driving through the mountains late one evening, far past the point of exhaustion, when I saw the glowing sign for a roadside motel. The lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered in front of the rooms. It wasn't my first choice, but at midnight on a back road, it was the only choice. The lobby smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. The man at the front desk was tall, with stringy hair and a pale complexion. He spoke in a flat monotone, asking how many nights I'd be staying. I told him just one, and he slid a room key across the counter without much more than a nod. Room 6. Enjoy your stay, he said, his lips twitching into something that was supposed to be a smile but wasn't. I carried my bag to the room. It wasn't bad clean sheets, working air conditioner, a faint hum from the ice machine down the hall. I locked the door, tossed my bag on the chair, and went about brushing my teeth before collapsing onto the bed. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, right outside my door. At first, I thought maybe another guest had checked in, but something about the way the footsteps stopped directly in front of my room made my stomach tighten. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was the clerk. He was just standing there in the hallway, staring straight at my door, motionless. I backed away quickly, telling myself maybe he was checking the rooms. Maybe it wasn't. As strange as it seemed. But even after a minute, the footsteps didn't continue. The silence stretched on. I forced myself to check again. He was still there. I remember my heart hammering in my ears as I stepped back from the door. I didn't want to call attention to myself, but the thought of him just standing there, listening, made my skin crawl. I turned the TV on low, just for the noise, and tried to distract myself. After a while, I convinced myself I was overreacting. He'd probably walked away, and I just hadn't heard it. I checked again. He was closer. This time, his face was tilted toward the peephole, like he knew I was looking. I stumbled back, a sharp gasp escaping before I could stop it. I grabbed my phone and debated calling the front desk, but how could I? He was the front desk. I sat on the bed, clutching my phone, too afraid to move. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then, slowly, I worked up the courage to check again. The hallway was empty. Relief washed over me. Maybe I had imagined how long he was out there. Maybe I was just paranoid. I double-checked the lock, pushed the dresser against the door for good measure, and crawled into bed. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound that froze my blood. The sound of my doorknob jiggling. Not just once over and over, like someone was testing it, pushing against the lock. I didn't dare move. My eyes darted to the shadows under the door, and I saw them, the faintest outlines of feet. He was still there. I stayed perfectly still, every muscle tense, praying he would just go away. The knob rattled one last time, then silence. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat upright in bed, staring at the door until I finally saw the faint light of dawn creeping through the curtains. When the sun came up, I packed my things and left the room as quickly as possible. The hallway was empty, eerily quiet. When I reached the lobby, the clerk was back behind the desk, exactly where he had been the night before. His expression was calm, almost cheerful. "Sleep well?" he asked. His voice was light, but there was something underneath it, something mocking. I didn't answer. I just dropped the key on the counter and walked out. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the row of rooms. The curtains of room 6 shifted slightly, like someone was standing there, watching me leave. I never stayed at another roadside motel again. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't the stranger outside your door, it's the one who already has the key. It started as the faintest sound barely audible over the motel air conditioner. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from directly behind my head, inside the wall. I was on a work trip, driving through small towns that seemed to stretch forever, between appointments. By the time I reached the motel, the sky was already pitch black. It wasn't my first choice, but I was too tired to keep going. The place was one of those older motels with doors that opened directly to the parking lot. The room itself was what you'd expect. Faded carpet, buzzing light fixture, the smell of dust clinging to the air. I tossed my bag on the chair, locked the door, and collapsed into bed, eager to get a few hours of sleep. For a while, everything was fine. The steady drone of the air conditioner and the occasional car passing on the highway outside lulled me into drowsiness. But then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. I opened my eyes, disoriented. The sound was faint but distinct, coming from just behind the headboard. I sat up slowly, pressing my ear closer to the wall. Tap, tap, tap. It was steady, spaced out, like someone gently tapping their fingernail against wood. I tried to reason with myself. Old buildings make noises all the time, pipes, wiring, shifting wood. That had to be it. But the more I listened, the more deliberate it sounded. Not random creaks, but a pattern, a rhythm. I pulled the thin pillow over my head, telling myself to ignore it, but it continued. Tap, tap, tap. After nearly an hour, I gave in. I switched on the bedside lamp and slid off the bed, kneeling to peer behind the headboard. Nothing, just dust and peeling wallpaper. I knocked lightly on the wall, half expecting to hear the sound echo back, but the room remained silent. Feeling a little ridiculous, I got back into bed, turned off the light, and tried again to sleep. Not 5 minutes later, tap, tap. This time, it was louder. I sat up, my pulse quickening. The sound was coming from the exact spot where my head had been resting. I pressed my hand against the headboard, and for a split second, I swore. I felt the faintest vibration beneath my palm, as if something had retreated deeper into the wall. A cold sweat prickled the back of my neck. I told myself it had to be mice, or maybe a bird caught somewhere in the old structure. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The taps were too intentional, too perfectly spaced. I turned the TV on. For background noise, hoping it would drown the sound out. For a while, it worked. I started to calm down, letting the voices from some late-night infomercial blur together. Then, right as I was drifting off, tap, the sound cut through the TV noise, sharp and close. I froze. This time, it wasn't repeated. Just one single deliberate tap. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but then it came again, louder. Tap, almost as if whoever or whatever was inside the wall was responding to me. That was enough. I turned the lights on, threw my things back into my bag, and decided I was checking out right then and there, regardless of the hour. But as I grabbed my bag, curiosity got the better of me. I leaned down one last time and put my ear against the headboard. Silence. I stayed like that for a moment, almost relieved. Maybe it was over. Maybe I was just overtired. And then, right against my ear, so close it felt like it came from inside the wood itself. Tap, tap. I stumbled back with a gasp, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't even put my shoes on. I just grabbed my bag and bolted out. The door. The front desk clerk looked startled when I dropped the key onto the counter. I muttered something about an emergency and hurried out to my car. When I finally pulled out of the lot, I glanced back at the row of rooms. The curtains in mine, the ones I was sure I had left drawn, shifted slightly, like someone had brushed. Past them, I drove through the night until the sun came up, and I haven't stayed in a roadside motel since. Because sometimes, when I'm lying awake in silence, I swear I can still hear it. Tap, tap. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but as I passed the front desk that night, I caught the clerk whispering, "Room 7 is occupied again." The problem was, no one had checked into room 7 for years. I'd been driving for most of the day, crossing state lines and chasing deadlines for work. By the time I pulled into the small roadside motel, I was too tired to keep going. The building was nothing special, peeling paint, buzzing neon, a kind of place you stop out of necessity, not choice. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A single desk lamp lit the counter where the clerk, a thin man in his 50s, greeted me with a tired smile. The check-in was routine. Name, card, receipt, room key. He gave me room 9, toward the end of the row. I thanked him and was heading out when another voice spoke from behind the desk, softer, like it wasn't meant for me. A woman, maybe a housekeeper, muttered, "Room 7 is occupied again." I paused mid-step, glancing back. The clerk shot her a look that shut her up immediately. When I asked, what did she mean? He shook his head quickly. Nothing. Just staff talk. "Don't worry about it," he said, forcing a smile. I let it go, though the way he brushed it off stuck with me. Room 9 was as bland as I expected. Faded curtains, a hum from the AC unit, a stale smell I couldn't quite place. I unpacked a few things and settled in, flipping on the TV for background noise. But my curiosity about what I'd overheard gnawed at me. As I lay in bed, I started paying attention to the rooms nearby. Through the thin walls, I could hear faint sounds, shuffling, movement, the creak of floorboards. Directly next to me, to my left, was room 8. To my right was room 7, and I swore I heard movement coming from soft footsteps. The sound of something dragging, a faint knock, like furniture bumping against the wall. I told myself someone must be staying there. But when I stepped outside for a soda from the vending machine, I noticed something strange. Every door had a key tag hanging from the outside latch except room 7. Its number plate was cracked, and the paint around it was more weathered than the others, like it hadn't been touched in years. Back in my room, the noises continued. It was past midnight when I finally gave in to curiosity. I pressed my ear against the wall. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, clear as day, I heard whispering Dot. It wasn't muffled, either. It sounded like someone was standing right against the other side of the wall, muttering words I couldn't make out. The voice was low, raspy, almost strained. My chest tightened. I pulled away, heart pounding. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Faint tapping, dragging sounds, whispers seeping through the thin wall. The next morning, bleary-eyed, I went back to the front desk. The same clerk was there. "Someone was in room 7 last night," I said. I heard them talking. He froze, his fake smile faltering. "Room 7 hasn't been occupied in years," he said flatly. I laughed nervously. "No, I'm serious. Someone was definitely in there. I heard them moving around." His tone sharpened. "No one has stayed in room 7 since before my time. That room is locked. Please don't mention it again." The way he cut himself off sent a chill down my spine. That night, despite every instinct telling me not to, I listened again. The sounds came back. Tapping, dragging, whispering. Sometimes, it felt like it was right behind my headboard. Other times, like it was moving along the wall, pacing Dot. At one point, the whispers grew clearer, and I swear I heard my own name. I sat bolt upright, my blood running cold. That was it. I packed my things in the middle of the night, intent on leaving. But as I stepped outside, I couldn't resist glancing at room 7's door. The cracked number plate gleamed faintly under the buzzing parking lot light. The door itself looked warped, like it had been forced shut too many times. And for a split second, just a flicker, I thought I saw the knob turn. I didn't wait to see more. I threw my bag in the car and sped off into the night. The memory should have ended there, but it didn't. A few weeks later, out of morbid curiosity, I searched for that motel online. Buried in old forum posts, I found it. Stories from other travelers mentioning room 7. They all said the same thing: strange noises, whispers, shadows moving under the door. And always, the staff denying anyone had stayed there. One post claimed a guest had died in that room decades ago, found slumped against the wall with his nails bloodied from scratching. Another claimed the motel had sealed the room permanently, but sometimes it still gets occupied. I never drove that highway again, but to this day, whenever I stay in a motel, I listen closely to the walls. Because sometimes, if the room next to you is too quiet, that's when you should worry. At least if you hear something, you know you're not alone. And in room 7, you never are. The first time I noticed the hole in the shower wall, I thought it was just cracked tile. The second time, I swear something blinked from inside it. I'd been driving for hours, the kind of endless highway stretch where every town looks the same and the neon motel signs blur together. By the time I checked into a roadside inn, I wasn't thinking about comfort. I just wanted sleep and a hot shower. The room was nothing special. Floral bedspread, flickering lamp, a faint smell of mildew. But the water pressure in the shower was strong, and after a long day on the road, that was all that mattered. I let the hot water steam up the tiny bathroom, washing the fatigue from my skin. That's when I saw it. Just below eye level, between two grimy tiles, was a small, jagged hole. At first, I thought it was just damaged old motels rarely keep their bathrooms in good shape, but something about it caught my attention. The edges looked chipped inward, like the hole didn't come from wear, but had been made intentionally. I leaned closer, squinting through the steam. It was too dark to see much inside, just blackness. I told myself it was nothing and tried to ignore it, but as I turned away, I caught it. A flicker, a shift, like something on the other side had moved. I froze. water pounding against my shoulders, my heart racing. I told myself I was imagining its steam, shadows, maybe the way the water trickled across the hole. But I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. Cautiously, I leaned in again. My breath fogged the tile as I stared into the hole. And then clear as day I saw it. An eye, wide, unblinking at first. Then it blinked. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet floor, a cry escaping my throat. The water roared in my ears, but underneath it I swore. I heard the faintest sound. Breath. Someone was on the other side of that wall. My mind raced. Was it some kind of maintenance crawl space? Another room? Whoever it was had been watching. I shut the water off immediately, wrapped myself in the thin towel, and backed into the bedroom, my skin crawling. My first instinct was to call the front desk, but when I picked up the phone, it was dead. Just a faint buzz of static. The only option was to confront it or leave. Against my better judgment, I grabbed the chair from the corner and wedged it under the doorknob, then returned to the bathroom. The hole looked so small, so innocent now, but I couldn't forget that eye staring back at me. I pressed my ear against the tile. For a moment, nothing. Then a faint scraping sound, like fingernails dragging against wood. I stumbled back, my chest tight with panic. That was enough. I dressed in record time, stuffing my belongings into my bag, ready to leave. But just as I reached for the door, something made me stop. A noise, coming not from the bathroom, but from the closet near the bed. It was a soft thump, then another, like someone shifting their weight, trying not to be heard. The air in the room turned cold, my stomach dropping as I realized something horrifying. The hole hadn't led to another room. It hadn't been maintenance. It led directly into mine. My shaking hand reached for the knob. Before I could pull it open, the door creaked slowly, on its own from the inside. I didn't wait. I bolted, yanked the chair out from under the main door, tore it open, and sprinted into the night. I didn't stop until I was in my car with the doors locked and the engine roaring. As I sped away, I risked one glance in the rearview mirror. The curtain of my room shifted. Someone was standing there, watching me drive into the darkness. I never went back. But every time I shower in a hotel or motel now, I check the tiles. Because once you've seen an eye staring back at you from the wall, you can never unsee it. When I first noticed the car outside my motel window, I thought nothing of it. But by the time the clock hit 3 a.m. and the driver still hadn't moved, I knew something was very wrong. I'd been on the road for almost 13 hours when I finally pulled into a roadside motel off the interstate. The glowing vacancy sign buzzed against the night sky, and the lot was nearly empty. I just wanted a bed, a shower, and 6 hours of sleep before getting back behind the wheel. The lobby was as run down as the exterior yellowed wallpaper, a cracked tile floor, a desk clerk who barely looked up from his magazine when I checked in. He handed me the key to room 5, grunted something about checkout time, and went back to ignoring me. The room itself was what I expected. 2 stiff beds, a TV bolted to the dresser, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and closed the curtains. I thought I'd be out cold in minutes. But sometime after midnight, I woke up thirsty. I got up, shuffled to the sink, and as I passed the window, I noticed the curtains weren't fully closed. Through the thin gap, I saw headlights. A car was parked directly outside my window. At first, I thought maybe it was just another guest. But what struck me was how it was angled, not toward a room, not near the entrance, but directly, facing mine. I tried to shake it off. People park weird all the time. I pulled the curtains tight and got back into bed. But the unease stuck with me. An hour later, restless, I got up again. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I peeked through the curtain. The car was still there. Engine off. Headlights dead. But I could make out the faint silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. My skin prickled. Who just sits in their car like that, in the middle of the night, without moving? I told myself maybe they were just tired. Maybe they were on the road like me and needed a break. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. They weren't reclined. They weren't shifting. They were just sitting, facing my room. I shut the curtain again, heart thudding, and tried to force myself back to sleep. By 3 a.m., I hadn't slept a minute. I kept hearing things, the crunch of gravel, the faint hum of an engine turning over, though when I looked, the car hadn't moved. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps in the lot, slow and deliberate, circling. Finally, I couldn't take it. I decided to confront it, or at least confirm what I was seeing. I crept to the window, gently peeled the curtain back. The car was closer. It had been moved up by a few feet, angled slightly differently, but still, pointed right at my window. And the figure inside was clearer now. A man. His head tilted, his face just barely visible in the glow of the lot's lone lamp. He wasn't asleep. He was staring straight at my window. I stumbled back, panic rising. In my chest. I checked the lock on the door again, shoved the desk chair under the handle, and grabbed my phone to call the front desk. But when I dialed, it just rang and rang. Nobody answered. For the next hour, I sat on the edge of the bed, every muscle, tense, listening for footsteps, waiting for the door handle to rattle. I thought about leaving, but the idea of stepping outside into that parking lot, with him sitting there, was worse. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me, because I woke up to the thin gray light of morning seeping through the curtains. I rushed to the window. The car was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just some weirdo, maybe harmless, maybe waiting for someone. But when I checked out, I asked the clerk casually if he'd seen a car in the lot last night. He gave me a confused look. You're the only guest who checked in yesterday. No one else was here. I pressed him, insisting I'd seen headlights. A man sitting outside my room. His face hardened, and he shook his head. Sir, there hasn't been anyone else staying here for 2 nights. Maybe you were dreaming. But I know what I saw. A man, sitting in his car, watching my window all night. And I can't stop wondering if I hadn't closed the curtains, if I hadn't locked the door. What would he have done once he decided to get out of that car? When I checked into the motel, the clerk leaned forward with a serious look and said, "Whatever you do, don't go in room 12. Later that night, the knocking started. I was driving cross-country, worn down from 12 hours on the road. When I pulled into a small roadside motel just after sunset, the place looked old, but not abandoned. One glowing neon sign, a gravel lot with maybe 3 cars. I just wanted a bed and a shower. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit with the faint smell of coffee and cigarettes clinging to the air. A man behind the desk looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. His voice was flat when he asked how long I'd be staying. Just 1 night, I told him. He slid the register toward me, then hesitated before handing over the key. His eyes darted toward the far end of the building. Room 11, he said quietly. Then, after a pause, and don't go in room 12. Whatever happens tonight, no matter what you hear, don't open that door. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of joke, but he didn't smile. His expression was deadly serious. Why not? I asked, half curious. He shook his head. Just don't. I took the key, uneasy but too tired to press further. My room was simple bed, dresser, was in AC. The curtains barely covered the window, and the sheets smelled faintly of bleach. Across the narrow hall was room 12. Its door was scuffed and dented, the number plate hanging crookedly, like it had been forced shut too many times. I tried to shrug it off, but as I unpacked, I couldn't help glancing at that door. The way the clerk had warned me made it impossible to ignore. By midnight, I'd finally drifted off. That's when the knocking started. It was faint at first, 3 dull thuds echoing through the hall. I sat up, heart racing, listening. Another 3 knocks followed, louder this time. I slipped out of bed and crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. The knocking was coming. From room 12. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, deliberate, like someone pounding on the inside of the door with their fist. I backed away, remembering the clerk's warning. No matter what you hear, don't open it. The noise stopped suddenly, leaving. The hallway silent. I stood frozen in the middle of my room, waiting, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then a whisper, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. A woman's voice. Help me. The sound cut straight through me. It was desperate, fragile. I stared at my door, torn between the warning and the plea. What if someone was actually trapped? In there? Please, let me out. I moved closer, straining to hear. My hand hovered over the knob, every instinct screaming not to touch it. Before I could decide, the voice changed. It grew louder, harsher. Let me out. The words rattled through the hall, followed by furious pounding that shook the walls. I stumbled back, slamming into the dresser. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared at the door across from mine, half expecting it to burst open. Then, as suddenly as it started, silence. The hallway was still again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair by the window, the glow of the parking lot light seeping through the curtains, waiting for dawn. Every creak of the building made me flinch. When the sun finally rose, I gathered my things and bolted for the lobby. The clerk was there, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale. He looked at me like he already knew. You heard it, didn't you? He asked quietly. I swallowed hard. What's in there? Who was that? He shook his head. Not who, what? I pressed him, but he wouldn't explain further. He only repeated, never open that door. I left without breakfast, without another word. As I carried my bag past room 12, I couldn't help glancing at it one last time. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to see the darkness inside. I hurried to my car, heart pounding, and didn't look back. To this day, I don't know what was in that room. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I still hear it, the slow, steady knocking. Thud, thud. When we first noticed there were no mirrors in the room, we laughed it off as just another quirk of a rundown motel. But when we found the shattered glass hidden beneath the bed, the laughter stopped. My girlfriend and I had been driving through back roads for hours, the kind of endless stretch of highway where towns seemed more like afterthoughts than destinations. By the time we stumbled across the small roadside motel, it was past midnight. We were both too tired to be picky. The sign buzzed faintly in the dark vacancy in half-lit letters. Inside, the lobby smelled like stale coffee and cleaning chemicals. The clerk barely looked up as he slid us the key to room 3. The room was about what we expected. Sagging mattress, yellowed lampshades, the faint hum of an old air conditioner. But as soon as I dropped my bag and took a look around, something struck me. There were no mirrors, not on the bathroom wall, not above the dresser, not even a small one hanging near the door, like most motels had. It wasn't just bare walls. Either I could see faint outlines, or mirrors had once been mounted, lighter rectangles surrounded by years of grime. Guess they don't want us checking ourselves out, I joked, but my girlfriend frowned. It's weird, not even in the bathroom? Who takes all the mirrors out? I shrugged it off, too tired to care. But the absence of mirrors made the room feel strangely incomplete, like it was missing something essential. We settled in, trying to ignore the faint musty smell that clung to everything. The sheets felt scratchy, the air heavy. Still, exhaustion eventually pushed us toward sleep. That's when my girlfriend sat up suddenly. "There's something under the bed," she whispered. I sighed, figuring it was just dust or trash. Still, I knelt down, lifted the edge of the sheet, and peered underneath. At first, I saw nothing but shadows. Then my flashlight beam caught at tiny, jagged fragments scattered along the floorboards, shards of glass. I reached carefully and picked one up. It was sharp, smeared with a faint, dark stain I didn't want to identify. As I shone the light around, more pieces glimmered back at me. A whole mirror, shattered and shoved out of sight. My stomach tightened. "Don't touch it," my girlfriend said quickly. Her voice trembled. "Just leave it." I set the shard back down, uneasy now. Why would a motel strip every mirror and leave broken pieces hidden under the bed? We tried to ignore it, crawling back under the covers, but sleep wouldn't come. The air conditioner rattled faintly. The pipes groaned. Every sound made me tense. At some point, in the half-awake haze, I thought I heard something else. A faint scraping, like glass being dragged across wood. I opened my eyes in the dim room, the curtains glowing faintly from the parking lot light outside. My girlfriend stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Before I could answer, there was a soft crunching noise from beneath the bed. We both froze. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and leaned over the side of the bed. For a split second, I thought I saw its shards shifting, dragging slightly across the floor as if pushed from the inside. Then stillness. My throat went dry. "We're leaving," I whispered. We scrambled to throw our things together, but before we could reach the door, a sharp crack rang out behind us, the sound of glass breaking. I turned, light flashing across. The room. The pile of shards beneath the bed had shifted outward, scattered into the open. Something was trying to come through. That was all it took. We bolted, leaving half our stuff behind. The clerk barely looked up when we shoved the key. On the counter, his expression unreadable, like he already knew why we were leaving. We drove until sunrise before stopping again. Neither of us spoke much on the road, both shaken, both unwilling to put into words what we thought we'd heard. But I keep coming back to one detail. When I picked up that shard under the bed, I could have sworn I saw something in its reflection. Not just the ceiling above me, but a face I didn't recognize. And if all the mirrors in that motel had been removed, I can't help but wonder what they were trying to keep from. Looking back, the motel phone rang once, sharp and jarring in the silence. When I answered, a rasping voice on the other end didn't ask for me. It whispered my name. I'd been driving alone all day, through miles of flat country roads that blurred together, under the headlights. By the time I spotted the glowing neon vacancy sign, I was running on fumes. The place looked like 100 others I'd stayed in single story, a row of doors facing the lot, half the bulbs in the sign burnt out. Inside, the lobby was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of old coffee. The clerk barely looked up as I signed in. He slid me a brass key for room 4, and that was that. The room was small and musty, but clean enough. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and flicked on the TV for background noise. The hum of the air conditioner and the muffled voices from the screen filled the emptiness. Sometime after midnight. I dozed off. The phone woke me. That beige rotary-style phone on the nightstand, the kind that looks like it hasn't worked in decades, let out a shrill ring that jolted me upright. My first thought was that it was the front desk. Maybe something. With billing, maybe a mistake. I picked up, pressed the receiver to my ear. Hello? For a second, nothing. Just static. Then, slowly, deliberately, I heard it. A voice rasping my name, not asking, not questioning, just repeating it. Over and over. My chest tightened, a cold prickle running down my arms. Who is? This? I demanded, trying to sound steady. The voice didn't answer. It just kept saying my name, softer this time, like a whisper curling into my ear. I slammed the phone down, heart racing. I sat in silence, staring at the receiver, waiting for it to ring again. The room felt colder now, the shadows in the corners darker. After a minute, I convinced myself it had to be some prank, maybe someone at the desk messing around with an old phone line. But then it rang again. I jumped, staring at it. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Against every instinct, I picked it up. This time, the voice was louder, more insistent. My name, drawn out like it was savoring the sound. I hung up again, harder this time, my hand trembling. I tried to calm myself, turned the TV volume up, told myself it was just some creep with the wrong number. But deep down, I knew it wasn't random. It knew my name. Not long after, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. I froze. Front desk, a man's voice called. Relief almost washed over me, until I realized something. The voice wasn't the clerk I'd met earlier. This voice was the same rasping one from the phone. I didn't answer. I didn't move. After a few seconds, a knocking came again, louder. Let me in. The doorknob rattled, metal scraping against the lock. I backed away, clutching my phone like a lifeline, though who would I even call? I was in the middle of nowhere. Then silence. The longest silence I've ever felt, heavy and suffocating. I waited, straining to hear, my pulse loud in my ears. And then the phone rang again. I didn't want to answer, but the sound was unbearable. I lifted the receiver with shaking hands. The voice was right there, closer than before. I'm already inside. The line went dead. I dropped the phone, spun around in terror, scanning the room. The curtains shifted faintly in the corner, though no air was blowing. The shadows seemed thicker, like they were watching. I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my bag, flung the chair from the door, and ran into the night. I didn't even check out. I just drove until the sun came up. To this day, I don't know how anyone got my name or how they called that old rotary phone that shouldn't have even been connected. But sometimes, late at night, when my phone rings, I hesitate, because I can still hear my name whispered in that same rasp, just waiting for me to answer. I had never seen her before, but the motel housekeeper smiled at me and greeted me by name. Then she mentioned something about my life that no one there should have possibly known. I'd been traveling alone for a work conference, cutting across back roads to save time. By the time I reached the small roadside motel, the sun was setting, and exhaustion had long since dulled my nerves. The place looked outdated, but not unwelcoming, a faded neon sign, a row of doors opening directly to the parking lot, the hum of insects rising in the evening air. The check-in was uneventful. The clerk barely looked up as I signed my name, slid me a key, and muttered, "Room 10." I carried my bag inside, grateful to collapse onto the stiff bed. The first night passed without incident. But the next morning, as I left my room to grab something from the car, I nearly bumped into her, the housekeeper. She was standing right outside my door, arms full of towels, smiling like she'd been waiting for me. "Morning, Alex," she said. My blood ran cold. I hadn't introduced myself. I hadn't spoken to anyone but the clerk, and he hadn't asked for my first name. I forced a polite smile. Good morning." Her grin widened. "How's your sister doing?" "Emily, right?" I stopped dead in my tracks. My sister's name wasn't on any forms, and I hadn't mentioned her to anyone. "How do you—" I began, but she turned and walked down the hall before I could finish, humming to herself. I stood there for a long time, heart racing, before shaking it off. Maybe she'd overheard something. Maybe it was a lucky guess. Still, the encounter clung to me the rest of the day. That night, I locked the door, shoved the chair under the knob, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the next morning, she was there again. "Sleep well, Alex?" she asked cheerfully, her hands clasped in front of her. I nodded stiffly, moving past her. "You shouldn't stay up so late watching TV," she added, her voice light, casual. I froze. I had been watching TV late, flipping through channels until almost 2 a.m., but the curtains had been drawn, the volume low. There was no way she could have known. When I turned to question her, she was already walking away, humming that same tune. The unease grew heavier with each passing hour. I started to notice small things. My suitcase shifted slightly, the bathroom. Sink damp when I hadn't used it. I couldn't prove it, but I felt certain someone had been in my room while I was gone. That evening, as I pulled back the covers, I found something on the pillow. A Polaroid. Of me, sleeping. The photo was dark and grainy, but it was unmistakably me, my face turned toward the window, the dim glow of the parking lot light spilling through the curtains. I sat frozen, the picture trembling in my hands. My stomach twisted, as I realized whoever took it had been standing inside the room, just feet from where I lay. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of the building, every hum of the pipes made my heart pound. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting the knob to turn. At dawn, I packed my things in a frenzy. I wasn't staying another night. As I hauled my bag to the car, she appeared again. The housekeeper. She stood at the end of the row of rooms, smiling softly. "Safe travels, Alex," she said. Then, tilting her head slightly, "You'll see Emily soon." The sound of my sister's name on her lips made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I just threw my bag in the car and sped off, gravel kicking up behind me. I never went back to that motel. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced someone is standing just beyond the edge of the dark. And every now and then, tucked beneath my front door, I find things that don't belong. A folded towel, a Polaroid, and once humming, faint and distant, from the end of my hallway. I was alone in my motel room when I heard its screams, raw and frantic, echoing through the air vent above my bed. But when I told the front desk, they swore no one else was checked in. I'd been driving cross-country, stopping at small, cheap motels to rest between long stretches of highway. That night, I pulled into one just outside a nearly empty town. The place was run down but clean enough. All I cared about was a bed and a locked door. The clerk, an older man with tired eyes, handed me the key to room 6. He mentioned, almost proudly, that I was the only guest that night. "Whole place to yourself," he said. At the time, it sounded comforting. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant. Beige wallpaper peeled in the corners, and the bed squeaked if I so much as shifted my weight. I turned on the TV for background noise, then stretched out, ready to sleep. Sometime past midnight, I woke to silence. The TV had cut to static, and the air in the room felt colder, heavier. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint like wind rushing through the vent. Above the bed, But then I realized it wasn't air. It was screaming. Not playful shouting. Not a TV left on in another room. These were blood-curdling, desperate screams, muffled but unmistakable, as if someone was trapped on the other side of the vent. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. The sound went on for several seconds before cutting off, leaving the room deathly silent again. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the sound was carrying from outside, maybe a car stereo. But when it started, again, I knew better. This time, I pressed my ear to the vent. The metal was icy cold against my skin. The screams were louder, more frantic. I could make out words now, though they were broken by sobs. "Please let me out, please." My stomach turned. I grabbed the phone on the nightstand and called the front desk. The clerk answered grudgingly. "There's someone screaming." "In the vents," I blurted out. "You need to check. Maybe someone's hurt trapped in there." There was a long pause. Then he said flatly, "That's not possible. You're the only one here." I pressed him, but he insisted the rooms were empty, the ducts old and sealed. "Go back to sleep," he muttered, and hung up. But I couldn't. The screams came again, louder than ever, rattling the vent cover. My skin prickled as I stumbled back from the wall. It wasn't just sound, it was movement. Something was thrashing inside. I considered running, but fear rooted me in place. I sat in the chair across the room, staring at the vent, waiting for it to stop. Hours crawled by. The screams faded to whimpers, then silence. I thought maybe it was finally over. I forced myself back into bed, though every muscle stayed tense. But just as I began to drift off, I heard it again. Not screams this time, breathing. Slow, ragged, inches from my head. I shot up, and my eyes locked on the vent. Two pale hands gripped the slats from the inside, fingers curled around the metal. I scrambled across the bed, slammed into the far wall, unable to breathe. The fingers flexed once, then slid back into the dark. That was enough. I grabbed my bag, didn't even bother with shoes, and bolted from the room. The night clerk was gone from the desk. The lobby lights flickered, empty and cold. I didn't look back as I jumped in my car and sped away. The next day, in daylight, I searched for that motel online. But I couldn't find it. Not the name, not the location, nothing. Like it didn't exist. And sometimes, when I lie in bed at night, I swear I hear it again. Faint, muffled screams, seeping through the vents, as if whatever was in that room is still trying to find a way out. I was handed the key to room 9 with a smile from the motel clerk. But later, I learned the building only had 8 rooms. It was late, and I'd been driving for hours through stretches of empty highway when I saw the neon sign. Vacancy. Place looked old. Half the bulbs burnt out. The paint on the building faded. Still, I was too tired to keep going. The lobby smelled faintly of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. The clerk was an older woman with thinning gray hair. She slid a metal key across the counter without much small talk. "Room 9, she said. I muttered thanks, grabbed the key, and walked down the line of rooms. They were arranged in a row, doors facing the parking lot. I counted them automatically as I passed. 5, 6, 7, 8. Then 9. 9. The door looked a little different, slightly. More worn, the number plate crooked. Still, it opened easily, and the room inside was standard motel fare. Dated carpet, yellowed lamp, buzzing a C unit. Tired as I was, I didn't care. I threw my bag on the chair and collapsed into bed. At some point in the night, I woke up. It wasn't a sound that stirred me, more a feeling. That prickling sense you get when you're not alone. The room was pitch black, but I swore I heard faint movement, like someone shifting their weight on the carpet. I lay still, straining to listen. Silence. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just on edge. I turned over, squeezed my eyes shut, and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I checked out and grabbed a coffee from the lobby. The same clerk was behind the desk. Out of curiosity, I asked, "Hey, do you guys have a map of the motel? Just wondering how the rooms are laid out." She slid me a laminated card without looking up. The diagram was simple. 8 rectangles in a row, each labeled rooms 1 through 8, no room 9. I frowned. "This says there's only 8 rooms." The clerk looked up, confused. "That's right, 8 rooms." I held up the key. "But you gave me room 9. Her face went pale. "That's not possible. We don't have a room 9. I stared at her, certain she was messing with me. "I stayed in it last night." She shook her head, firmly now. "You couldn't have. Room 9 doesn't exist." A chill crept up my spine. I turned to look out the lobby window at the row of doors. Sure enough, I could only see 8 of them. No 9th door. I felt lightheaded. My mind raced back through the night, the crooked number plate, the faint sounds in the dark. Then, whose room was I in? I asked quietly. The clerk didn't answer. She just stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she sighed. "You should leave." I did. I grabbed my things and got back on the highway, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd miscounted. Maybe exhaustion had made me see something that wasn't there. But here's the part I can't explain. When I got home days later and unpacked my bag, I found something tucked inside. A key. The same metal key I'd been given, stamped with a crooked number. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I hear it again, that soft sound of footsteps on carpet, moving just beyond the edge of the dark, as if I never really left room 9. I opened the drawer of the knitstand, expecting a Bible, or maybe nothing at all. Instead, I found a Polaroid of me, standing in that very room. I'd been on the road all day, the kind of drive where the endless stretch of highway makes time blur together. By the time I spotted the flickering neon sign for a roadside motel, exhaustion had replaced caution. All I wanted was a bed. The clerk barely looked at me when I checked in. He slid over an old brass key and mumbled, "Room 4." His eyes lingered. On me a little too long, though, as if memorizing my face. The room was plain, dated carpet, healing wallpaper, and a humming AC unit in the window. I dropped my bag on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and flopped onto the bed. The mattress was stiff, but it didn't matter. As I reached over to the knitstand to plug in my phone, I noticed the drawer slightly ajar. Curious, I tugged it open. Inside was a faded Polaroid. At first, I thought it was nothing maybe left behind by another guest. But when I looked closer, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me. Not just someone who looked like me. It was me, standing in the middle of the room, wearing the same clothes I had on that moment. I dropped the photo onto the bed like it had burned me. My first thought was that the clerk had taken it somehow. But how? I had just checked in. Hey. Photo looked old, faded around the edges, like it had been sitting there for weeks. My heart raced. I checked the bathroom, the closet, under the bed, nothing. The door was still locked. I told myself it was impossible, that I was just overtired. Still, I shoved the Polaroid back in the drawer and tried to sleep. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke suddenly. The room was dark, but I felt it someone watching me. I sat up, listening. The air conditioner hummed steadily, but beneath it, I swore I heard something else. Breathing. I turned on the lamp, scanning the room. Empty. My gaze drifted to the knitstand. The drawer was open again. The Polaroid was lying on top. Only Now, it wasn't the same photo. This one showed me lying in the bed, the exact way I was lying at that very moment. I lurched back, my pulse hammering in my ears. My hands shook as I picked it up. The photo was dark, grainy, but it was unmistakably me, same shirt, same blanket pulled up to my chest. Someone had taken it while I was asleep. I jumped to my feet, yanked the chair against the door, and tried calling the front desk. The phone on the nightstand was dead, no dial tone. My cell had no service. I sat in the corner with the lamp on, clutching my bag, watching the door until the sky began to lighten. At dawn, I threw everything together and stormed to the lobby. The clerk was there, reading a newspaper. "I'm leaving," I said, tossing the key onto the counter. My voice shook as I added, "And you should tell your staff to stop sneaking into people's rooms." He looked up slowly, his expression flat. "There is no staff," he said, "just me." I glared at him, waiting for him to crack a smile, to admit it, but he just stared. Finally, I turned to leave. As I pushed open the lobby door, he called, "After me. You checked the drawer, didn't you?" My stomach dropped. I didn't answer. I just bolted for my car, heart slamming, and sped away without looking back. When I got home a few days later, I unpacked my bag. At the bottom, tucked between my clothes, was another Polaroid. This one showed me, behind the wheel of my car, leaving the motel. Whoever was taking the pictures hadn't stopped. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I can almost feel it again, the soft click of a camera in the dark. The motel owner handed me the key with a tired smile and said, "If you hear knocking tonight, just ignore it." Hours later, the knocking came from inside the closet. I'd been driving for most of the day, and exhaustion was setting in hard when I spotted the neon glow of a roadside motel. The place looked old but maintained, the kind of establishment that had probably been there since the 70s. The owner was behind the front desk, a thin man with graying hair and a polite but weary demeanor. As I signed the register, he slid me a brass key and leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "One thing," he said, "if you hear knocking in the night, ignore it. Don't get up. Don't answer. Just let it pass." I chuckled awkwardly, waiting for a smile that never came. His eyes were serious, almost pleading. Too tired to question it, I muttered, "Sure," and carried my bag to room 3. The room itself was plain beige walls, old carpet, the smell of dust faint in the air. The bed creaked as I sat down, and the AC unit buzzed faintly in the window. I noticed the closet door immediately. It was larger than usual, a heavy wooden thing with slats in the middle. Something about it unsettled me, though I couldn't say why. I locked the main door, drew the curtains, and stretched out on the bed. For a while, the hum of the AC was enough to calm me. But the owner's warning lingered in the back of my mind. Around 2 a.m., I woke suddenly. The room was quiet, the kind of suffocating silence where every small sound seemed amplified. That's when I heard it knock, 3 slow raps. Deliberate, echoing in the dark. My blood went cold. I froze, straining to listen. Knock. Knock. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the closet. Every hair on my body stood on end. The owner's words echoed in my mind. Ignore it. But it was impossible to ignore. The knocks grew louder, more insistent. Knock. Knock. I pulled the blanket tighter, my chest tightening with panic. I wanted to run, to fling the door, open and sprint to my car, but fear rooted me in place. Then came the whisper, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. "Please, let me out." My heart slammed against my ribs. The voice was soft, desperate, a woman's voice. I shook my head, whispering to myself, It's not real. It's not real. But the knocking continued. Louder. Faster. Let me out. The voice had changed, no longer pleading, but furious, violent. The closet door rattled against its frame, as if something inside was slamming against it. I stumbled out of bed, trembling, clutching my bag like a shield. My eyes stayed locked on the closet, half expecting it to burst open, and then silence. The sudden stillness was worse than the noise. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, my own breathing ragged in the quiet. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, I forced myself to move. I crept toward the door, every step deliberate, my eyes never leaving the closet. My hand closed around the knob. Just as I began to turn it, the closet creaked, the slats shifted, and through the gap, I saw it. An eye. Wide, unblinking, staring straight at me. I bolted. I didn't think I just ripped the door open, sprinted across the lot, and jumped into my car. My hands shook as I jammed the keys into the ignition. As the headlights flared, I glanced back at room 3. The closet door was open now, wide open, and the room was empty. I sped out of the lot and didn't stop driving until the sun came up. I never went back to that motel. But sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I hear it again in my head, 3 slow knocks. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that closet door.